March that some of you, yeah, that's funny. Got it. The program on Santa Muerte that I gave in last March, I guess, that some of you tuned in on, is now available on YouTube. So if you missed it, or if you want to look at it again to get some of the background of what we're going to present today in the first part of this, you just in the YouTube search box, you just write Bob Clarke, Clarke with an E, of course, and Santa Muerte, S-A-N-T-A, and then separate word M-U-E-R-T-E, Santa Muerte, and you'll get that lecture. Mike went to a lot of work to get that recording available for YouTube, and then uploaded it to YouTube. The same will happen with this program, I think. So it's a little easier than having to put a password in and so on, as Mike so helpfully circulated to us for the John Thyssen Memorial and some other things. Okay. Speaking of the Thyssen Memorial, many of you were on that. I wanted so much to participate. I was in Mexico City. I was trying to connect at a Wi-Fi spot, but it didn't work. And so I was very sorry to miss it, but I did watch the recording. Okay, so to begin, I showed some of you a short while ago an image of St. Jude, San Judas, as they call him, Tadeo in Spanish. And the reason I did that was that I want to update you on some experiences I had relating to the Santa Muerte religious movement, but I'm starting out with St. Jude. And the reason is that the St. Jude is a recognized saint in the Catholic Church, unlike Santa Muerte and Malverde and the others that we'll be talking about. But St. Jude has a following that overlaps very heavily with Santa Muerte. In fact, many of the people basically worship or connect to both. The St. Jude movement in Spain and Mexico City especially is connected with a particular church, the San Hipólito Church, very near where I was staying, right next to the Alameda Park in the central area of Old Mexico City. And that St. Jude movement has a Chicago connection, because the mass participation in that, which has gotten to a huge scale now, we're going to see in a minute a little manifestation of that, was stimulated by some priests from Chicago who arrived in Mexico City in the 1930s. Now, you know, the St. Jude National Headquarters is in Chicago on the south side. Some of you have been there. I've never visited, but St. Jude, the saint for lost causes and so on, actually got a huge relaunching in Mexico in the 1930s through the intervention of American priests from Chicago. And the very church that they went to do this is now the center of these huge celebrations in St. Jude's honor. The 28th of every month, there's a big commercial event as well as religious event. Pilgrims come from big distance. But the number one 28th of the year is October 28th. So the first image we're going to see is just some mariachis celebrating St. Jude on the 28th of October as part of this huge celebration. So they're right on the Hidalgo Avenue near the church next to the Alameda Park. And they're just celebrating St. Jude. You get the picture.
Sounds like Fellini music.
Well, it's mariachis. You know, they're capable of a lot of range of sound. Okay, let's look now. Now we see Santa Muerte. You've seen her before if you saw my previous presentation. This figure of Santa Muerte reappears at this same spot, very near the Zocalo, the central square of Mexico City, every year. She has a different robe on, usually a different decoration. It was at this place last year that I attended a street mass in her honor, and that was held at the time of the launching of her Memorial Days, October 28th through November 2nd. There's some dispute as to her birthday. She, of course, being not a real person, but her cult, like our selection of Christmas Day, December 25th, and so on, rather arbitrary, but in their minds, Some believe she was born on October 31st, which is our Halloween. Others on November 1st. We'll see some reflection of that in a minute. But this is Santa Muerte as I saw her last year. In this place I saw her last year, as she looks this year. Some of the faithful, as they walk by, and when this permanent display is up, whether there's a mass or not, will just reach over and touch the hem of her garment as a kind of talisman and promise of something better. This we're going to come back to.
See the pictures.
Okay. Now, Mike is always talking about the way I venture into these dicey neighborhoods in the pursuit of Santa Muerte. And the two new discoveries I made on this trip were two new temples. This is the first one.
I don't know.
Can you see that slide?
Yeah.
Okay, so you see the man standing, you see a sort of Christian cross there, and he's looking at a very a purple robed image of Santa Muerte. To the left, by the way, is St. Jude. And
Can't see them.
so I walked over into this neighborhood, which is what they call a barrio bravo. That means a rough neighborhood in Mexican Spanish. And so I walked over there in the middle of the afternoon. As I got closer, I thought maybe I shouldn't be here, because I kind of got out of the populated, seemed like a little safer area, into more and more dicey. But I was so determined to find this place because I'd never been to this temple and it's very famous. Anyway, the only person there was this guy. And I thought, wait a minute, what's going on? This is October 31st. This is the saint's birthday. Well, he explained to me that in their version of the Santa Muerte movement, they believe her birthday is November 1st, the next day. So he was there early and he said, come by tomorrow morning, which is anathema to me, but I'll make any sacrifices. So he said, come by tomorrow morning for the mass, her birthday mass. And that's what set that up, as you'll see. So I did engage a driver, and then my friend Alberto went along too. I think you'll see them at various points. And I actually had the driver pick me up with Alberto at the place where I was staying in the center of Mexico City at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then we drove into this somewhat questionable neighborhood and attended the mass. We were lucky enough to get there just in time. Now I have this slide up to tell you something about this particular temple. In the earlier, as you will remember maybe from my presentation last time, the Santa Muerte movement in its mega form that it's now assumed with 10 to 12 million followers in Mexico really got launched in the year 2001. So it's quite recent on a big scale. And it was by a lady who was a quesadilla seller in the Tepito market, which I displayed in the previous show. Now, although she is regarded as kind of the godmother of the movement, Doña Queta is her name, she was never a particularly public figure in pushing the kind of church movement. That was a role left to this David Romo Guillen. You see his name there? And from about 2001 to 2011, he was the principal public spokesperson for what became the Santa Muerte movement. And he had actually had a start in the US. He established what he called, as you see here, such a long name, the Traditional Missionary Catholic Church of the Sacred Heart and San Felipe. Well, St. Philip. He claimed that he had rediscovered in the Catholic Church the true church, which included Santa Muerte, Saint Death, not accepted by the church. Well, he got quite a lot of success. And the temple that we're seeing right now is the one he set up. Now, he ran across a rough patch, to put it mildly. There's his picture from one of the sort of Mexican tabloids. And it says he's not Santa Muerte. This is in 2011. David Romo, who had been the self-appointed Archbishop of the newly founded True Catholic Church with Santa Muerte, equal practically to Jesus, he was he had received official recognition for the church under the Vicente Fox government. But then the church turned on him, the Pope denounced him, and they got worried about his political proclivities, and he was arrested as being accused of part of a kidnapping ring and money laundering. And he was sentenced to 63 years in jail, where he now languishes. So he got knocked out of the picture. His wife took over this temple, and that's where we're going to visit now. So he's out of the picture, but this is the very temple that he established, and which was so famous through him until he was gotten rid of by the Calderon government, which was, by the way, a PAN government. That's the Catholic religious party in Mexico that happened to be in power at the time. So we're entering this temple on the day of the birthday mass of Santa Muerte. And I'm showing you this image of my friend, again here in case you can see him, Malverde. Now, Malverde, M-A-L-V-E-R-D-E, you see his name up at the top there? This dollar, sort of dollar sign, recognizes his ability to help you make money through the drug trade, basically. And Malverde is one of the saints who is folk saints who is almost always somehow present in the Santa Muerte temple. Now you see over to the right and left images of Santa Muerte herself, but here is, and look at the rifles and the dollar signs and so on. Malverde is the narco saint associated especially with the Sinaloa cartel, which you know was the Guzman operation. Guzman's now in a U.S. maximum security jail. His son has sort of taken over, and they tried to arrest that son in 2019 in Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa. But his army was stronger than the Mexican police and army, and they had to release him because literally they were overwhelmed by the narco military. So anyway, he has become a folk saint in Mexico to many people and the sort of narco community. And those of you who watch Netflix, if you're interested in a little self-flagellation, can get into the series that they've launched on him. It was done by Telemundo, the Mexican network, and is now bought up by Netflix. There are 80 episodes in the series on his life. It's complete fabrication. There's no historical basis, but he's presented in this series as a kind of Robin Hood figure, stealing from the rich, opposing the oligarchs in Mexico and the big landowners, and kind of being the poor guy's friend. And that has morphed into, since the death of various bandits who were sort of merged to become the Malverde figure, into this very dapper looking kind of cowboy figure who is universally recognized in Mexico as a symbol of the narco trade. Now, you'll wonder why I took this picture. This is in the temple where the birthday mass is being celebrated. And you notice that this lady has a red delicious apple sitting on the bench next to her. She has brought that as her offering.
Can you wait a second?
Yeah.
There's a lot of noise coming from somebody. If you can all mute your speakers, please mute your speakers. Okay,
Yeah,
go
there's
ahead.
a little interference there.
Sit down.
Okay. So you'll notice her apple. Now, the man that you saw standing in front of the temple that advised me to come the next day, which is today that we're seeing, told me, bring a red, delicious apple for the saint for her birthday. That's what's expected. That's what we want, what she wants. And this lady has done that. Now, these red, delicious apples are somewhat expensive in Mexico. And so I had very little notice. That night I was in the center of the city. I thought, where can I find a fruit market? I've got to get a red, delicious apple. And I couldn't find any. So I had to get these cheap apples. And so I had Alberto take my picture offering that cheap apple as unobtrusively as I could in one of the side chapels of the temple. So here's the rich gringo with a cheap apple, and that poor woman has brought the saint a really good one. But at least I had my apples. And you'll see I'm holding there a sheet of paper that they handed out two people who showed up for the mass. We were all very welcome, both the driver and my friend Alberto and myself were all welcomed in there. Nobody said a word against us. And this sheet was a kind of prayer to Saint Death, in which she explains to the public that she's not a demon, she's not the devil. She will bring you blessings. So this is the Mass actually in progress. Now you see they imitate the Catholic Mass. And the priest happens to be wearing a mask. Masks are more widely worn in Mexico than here for COVID. And anyway, he's using a kind of Catholic Mass format, but it is essentially a birthday Mass for Saint Death. Up in the upper right-hand corner, do you see Malverde up there again? The cowboy with the little red scarf. And to the left, please look at that image in purple of Saint Death. You notice this is one rare case where she's not depicted as a skeleton. You see another image of her in gold as a skeleton, as she is always depicted. So why is this very beautiful one with a normal face there? This was the guy who went to jail, who founded this temple, his attempt to escape attack for desecration of the church and raising up a death figure as the one to be worshipped. He tried to cover it up. So it's still there, even though he's in jail. The image he put up is there among all the others. They're very eclectic and sort of bricolage. They just add little touches and don't throw out the other ones. There you see a scattering of apples, some of the cheap kind that I brought, and some of the red delicious ones, which are her preference. You'll also see the cempasúchiles, the flowers that are associated with Days of the Dead in Mexico, because of course we're November 1st here as this Mass, seen as her birthday, but also is the first day that people go to cemeteries for what they call the inocentes, the children who have died. This lady, I'm including a picture. I didn't take this, but I'm including her picture because of some confusion that arose. If you remember last year, I said one of my most satisfying experiences in Mexico was going to the Tepito neighborhood, to the sort of Vatican of the Santa Muerte faith, another temple where the original lady who got things rolling in 2001 is still presiding. And I met Doña Queta, who is, you know, the closest thing I'll ever get to meeting a pope. I mean, she is kind of the madrina or godmother of the Santa Muerte movement. And then I read in the paper that Doña Queta had died a year or two before I got there. And I thought, wait a minute, I thought I met her, and yet here are these reports that she died. Well, unbelievably, there's another huge center of the Santa Muerte faith, which I also showed in that previous program, with the gigantic statue of Santa Muerte. It's a few miles from Tepito. The woman who took over that center after her son was murdered is also Doña Queta. They have the same name. So there were two female leaders of the Santa Muerte movement with the same name. The one who died is this one. She died in 2018. But when I saw the article saying Doña Queta died, I thought, wait a minute, who did I meet? Well, I did meet the right one, but this was the other one who is now gone. This is back at the temple where we started for the birthday Mass. And you see this member of the faithful is carrying an image of Santa Muerte dressed in red. The colors are very important. We'll get back to that in a minute. Red generally symbolizes a love interest, protecting yourself from rivals to your beloved, or the affections of your beloved. They are singing Las Mañanitas, which is the equivalent of Happy Birthday to Saint Death. Well, that's the traditional birthday song in Mexico. There they are again. So literally in the middle of the mass, they brought mariachis and of course paid them to come in and sing happy birthday to Saint Death. That was a sort of peak experience for me, one I had not expected to have. And I had read about this temple. I never thought I'd find it or get there, but this time I did. We saw that. Now, in all of these temples, there's a shop. And so you can actually buy things while the mass is going on, cards or images of Saint Death or anything associated. She was the sales clerk, very pretty young Mexican woman. Now, the second discovery I made of Santa Muerte was yet another temple that we've left now, the temple in the Morelos district where the birthday was being celebrated. This is a day or two later, and this is not with the driver. I went with my friend Alberto because this is an even rougher neighborhood. This is a neighborhood called Doctores, or doctors, and it's not a place where you're supposed to go. But I thought with Alberto, we took an Uber. I'll go there, and I knew we found the right place because I saw this guy installing, you see the image of Saint Death, they're just putting her in there. And in front of the temple, I'm sorry, I got to get my cat out of the room here. Cupid, get out of here. 1 second, please. Cupid, no, honey, you have to hold it. Sorry about that. Anyway, the other figure you see there is St. Jude. You can always tell him, you see that little flame coming out of the top of his head? That tells you that it's St. Jude. All right, so I knew I was at the right place. Now, the reason I especially wanted to visit this temple, well, it's not one that's known very much, is that it's a double temple. Part of it is dedicated to Santa Muerte, but the other part gives equal recognition to Malverde, the very narco saint that I mentioned. Now, and you'll see here, we invite you to the masses for our patron saint Malverde, that you see indicated there, his name. And those are the 3rd and 17th of every month at 8 p.m. Well, you know, I wasn't going to go into this neighborhood at 8 p.m., but I did go in the afternoon. And I saw this lady kind of cleaning up, and there was a great mass of flowers where she was. I thought she had a flower shop next door to the temple, but it turned out she's the chief of this whole temple operation. And this is the first time I've had this experience. I was working with my friend Alberto. I'm talking to her. She's a working class woman who has come to be the chief figure in this temple. And I said, I'd like to have a look at the temple and take some pictures. She said, absolutely not. And that's never happened before. And so I said, well, maybe we could make a little offering here. And I mentioned 100 pesos, which is $5. And she said, are you kidding? She said, you know, we have a lot of responsibilities. We have to go and help out people in the hospitals and so on. And no way, I won't permit anybody to take pictures. Well, then I said to Alberto, you better negotiate with her because, you know, literally he lives in a rough neighborhood and he knows, you know, the kind of expressions that people use. So we upped it to 200 pesos, which is $10. She said, no way, are you kidding? So I said, okay, I'm going to go for, I guess it was 500. And suddenly she broke out in smiles and yes, you can take all the pictures you want, and she would help us look around. So that's how I got to see it. But the first time I had to pay the equivalent of $25 to do this. Here she is. Listen a minute, I'll tell you what she's doing.
Le traen manzanas amarillas para el trabajo, le traen manzanas verdes para pedir que les brinda sus centavos a la gente, su moneda que traen en la bolsa. Le traen manzanas rojas para el amor, le traen manzanas.
Now, do some of you understand Spanish?
Yes.
Well, what she's explaining the different apples. and colors. And I asked her why that other temple wanted especially the red apples. And so she's explaining, well, the red is for, love interests and so on. Green is if you need money. So they use the green candles and green objects for money. And what's the third one? I think yellow. One is for jobs, one is for money, one is for love interest. And she's just explaining her understanding of how the color system works in the faith. Now, next to her was this figure of the devil, of Satan or Beelzebub or whatever you want to call him, very much honored there. And even my friend Alberto, who was with me, was a little bit taken aback when she explained that in her view, at this temple anyway, you see he's got a offering of tequila there and God knows what else. The devil is basically equivalent to God. And she said, we allow the devil to be in this honored position because he alone had the authority to speak directly to God. This is her daughter. Now, her daughter works at the temple with her. The daughter was pregnant. She's had a very rough life. And she worships especially Santa Muerte, the traditional one, but her mother is especially a follower of Malverde, the narco saint, who has the adjoining temple. Now you see this basket, this is fake money, but you see the red apple in there, and you can see the association between the large swath of the population who are having such a rough time in Mexico and the hope of getting wealth or prosperity through the intervention either of Santa Muerte or of Malverde. Here she is selling candles to a customer, and notice they're black. The black generally means that you want to do some damage to somebody. Now, here you'll see up above at a higher level the temple to Malverde himself, the narco saint. So this is right next to the Santa Muerte images. You see her in gold below. And this Dona Alicia, the name of this lady, is handing some cleaning materials up to this young boy who's cleaning up the Malverde temple up above. And she let me climb the ladder and get up there and take pictures after the payment. Everything was friendly after she got the $25. So there we are upstairs, having climbed the stairs. You see some knife offerings there to Malverde. He's a very benign looking guy, isn't he? And you see a traditional crucifix there too. Beautiful, expensive flowers, constantly refreshed. So people are spending money because they believe he can intervene and do things for them. And he is pretty openly known as the principal figure, at least for the Sinaloa cartel and associated with the drug trade, although there are people who can do other things for you. Okay, we're shifting ground. I wanted to talk to you somewhat about the women's issues in Mexico. This is from my room, the B&B where I was staying. This is a protest down the Juarez Avenue by Mexican women. And one of the things they're saying is not another victim. The biggest issue right now in terms of women's issues in Mexico is violence against women. And here you see in Cuernavaca, each one of these little squares is an image of a woman who's been brutally murdered in that state recently. This is another one that says here, 982 women killed in that little state of Morelos in the last year or two. So the killings of women are probably the biggest issue for the women's movement right now in Mexico. About 10 women a day are being killed. And it's a big increase. Exactly what's behind all that isn't entirely clear, but they want obviously a stop put to it. And AMLO, the president of Mexico, has kind of downplayed the numbers who have been done away with, but there were some very egregious cases, even while I was there. One that was particularly chilling during just those days I was there recently. This was in the media. A woman got into a taxi in Mexico City, of which I have some unpleasant memories. And she became clear that the driver was trying to kidnap her, and she struggled to get out of the car and was killed as she tried to escape his clutches. And that got a lot of publicity. Another one, an English teacher was going down just to teach her classes and was seized, and her mutilated body was found thrown by the road the next day. That was just in the few days I was there. These nationally publicized murders were occurring. So there's one demonstration after another, one exhibit after another. They call it feminicidio, femicide, killing of women. And here they report that in the state of Morelos, the one where we saw those signs, that's where Cuernavaca is in the state of Morelos, the killing of women is out of control. There's another interesting aspect of the women's movement and sexual identity politics in Mexico. A lot of artistic depictions of transsexuals and people cross-dressing and so on. That's become a rather widespread phenomenon. I wanted also to show some of the transformations that are occurring there. These are supporters of the Zapatista movement in front of the Bellas Artes, the big arts palace in central Mexico, old Mexico City. And they're middle class, obviously middle class, probably upper middle class Mexico City young women, but they're dressed as Zapatista Indian or indigenous revolutionaries. And this is a way some women are identifying now, very far on the left, in addition to what were specifically women's issues. I wanted to show some of the changes occurring in the women's area in Mexico, namely the occupations that were formerly closed off to women. Excuse me. This is the cab driver I had to the airport on the way back here. First time I use Uber now exclusively because of safety issues. And she's the first female Uber driver I've encountered. And she said she's been doing it for 3 years. She's never had a violent incident, but she's very careful and she works only during the day. She would not feel safe driving at night. And indeed, the men drivers have told me the same thing. They do it for the money, but they worry. This is Doña Alicia and her daughter that we saw earlier in the double temple to Malverde and Santa Muerte. I included it here to show that in the Santa Muerte faith, the dominant roles are all held by women. So in some cases, men had them and they were murdered and then the women took over. In other cases, the women founded them. And pretty much the Santa Muerte, now the fastest growing religion in Latin America, it has no centralized church structure, but the leadership and people who run the operations and conduct the masses are overwhelmingly female. Another new occupation for a woman. This woman is a bartender at the Chinampa bar, the greatest bar in Mexico, in my opinion, and the Plaza Garibaldi, where all the mariachis perform all night long. And I've been popping in that bar at least once during every Mexico stay for many years. I've never seen a female bartender, and there she was. Wanted to move on to some other political issues in Mexico that I said I would bring you up to date on if I had a chance. This refers to the Tren Maya. This is one of AMLO, the new president, the current president. You see him below there. Is one of his mega projects. One of them is the new airport outside Mexico City, very controversial. And another one is building this Maya train to connect better rail service between Mexico City and Yucatan. There's been a lot of issues about that. Some archaeologists are concerned that it's going to destroy Mayan ruins or unknown archaeological sites. And a lot of people are protesting that they're not being paid enough for the land that's being taken over. That's what this is about. The ejidatarios have traditional land holdings that were secured by the revolution, and they are holding out and not selling their land for the railway because they don't think they're being paid enough. Throughout Mexico City, you see political protests. Under AMLO, the current president, there's been a kind of carte blanche offered for protests. You don't have to get a police permit. You can just block off huge streets, and you never know when this is going to happen. Here, they've blocked off the #1 north-south axis in Mexico City, and they just turn buses around and put up signs. They may be a small group, but they're allowed to do this. And it really screws up the traffic situation. You can call an Uber taxi. It would normally be there to pick you up in 5 minutes. Suddenly main arteries are shut down by protesters and it can take a half hour. Okay, now I want to take us into some other territory here. I wanted to mention a couple of things about the women's movement. Can you see all those images? Can you see all the images?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, I wanted to mention about the women's issues, the abortion question. It's very interesting that in the last year or so in Mexico, the Mexican Supreme Court made a very important constitutional ruling that Mexican states cannot forbid abortion. Now, it's very interesting that our own Supreme Court made an opposite decision, didn't it? That the states can forbid abortion. And so Mexico, which was always perceived as this backward Catholic country without women's rights, and so they're way ahead of us on the abortion issue. They already were in certain localities like Mexico City. But the peculiar situation has arisen where women in Texas who need an abortion actually have to cross the border into Mexico in many cases, either to get an abortion or to get the abortion pill. And there are actually organizations of women militants, both Mexican and gringo women on the Texas side of the border, who are organizing to get those pills from the Mexican side and deliver them to women on the American side. So the whole thing has been turned around where we viewed ourselves as being more advanced in these areas. We're now on the opposite side of the fence, and they're the ones that are taking the lead. So there have been some breakthroughs in terms of women's rights, both in breaking into new occupations and in gaining abortion rights. At the same time, however, they're facing tremendous threats to their personal safety, and that is why that is the #1 issue for them. I wanted to talk a little bit about the whole issue of violence too, and narco violence in Mexico. It's a huge issue. The homicides in Mexico in the last 15 years, absolute numbers have tripled. So they're up to about 35,000 murders a year recorded. Now, to give you a comparison, the US population is almost 3 times as big as Mexico's. We have about 15,000 murders a year. So that means that the rate of homicide in Mexico overall is about 5 to 6 times as high as it is in the US. And most of that has built up in the last 10 to 15 years. Each president has promised solutions. Nothing has particularly slowed it down. While I was there, I don't have an image of this, probably just as well, but something that really freaked people out in Mexico, this was seen on all the media, was some video. This is in the city of Zacatecas, which is way north and was out of the zone of narco violence for a long time. Of a dog that was showed a dog ambling through the streets of Zacatecas with a human head in its mouth that it was gnawing on. So one of the narco executions had just beheaded somebody, tossed the head down, and a dog picked it up and was carrying it through the streets. Now, Mexicans are pretty hard to shock, but that really set some people aback, that image, and it was shown on television. So this is a persistent issue. I'm going to try to get to some other images here if I can too before we conclude. Let's see if I can bring this off. Yeah, can you see those images? Can everyone see those?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I promised you an update. I'm sorry to become so frivolous here, but time has become an issue. I wanted to touch on some of those political issues. We may get back to some if we have time. But I also promised you an update on my relationship with Peppa, the huge hog. And these are some people I came to know at this eco community outside Cuernavaca. On the right is my friend Alberto, who was a guide years ago in Merida, moved back to his family in Mexico City, so I see him there. These are some of the other people. The woman he's hugging there to his right, I stayed in her house last year. a very eco house where if you want to flush the toilet, you're supposed to collect the water from your shower and pour it in so nothing gets wasted. I abstained. Now here's my reunion with Peppa. Peppa, this hog who's now up to, I think, about 450 pounds. Peppa is the queen of this eco community. There are about 10 or 12 houses and sets of residents there. Several of them are expatriates, some of them Mexicans, who live in this idyllic community. It has a gate and you have to get through that to get in, buzz through. But then you're in this beautiful setting in the mountains outside Cuernavaca. And the reigning queen of the community is this hog. Everybody worships and adores her. And it's considered a very great honor to feed her. Here I am. You see some of the food that on our way out there, we stopped after seeing the cemetery in Cuernavaca for the Day of the Dead visits that people make there. It happened to be going on in the afternoon in Cuernavaca. We had to stop at a market where I stocked up on treats for Peppa. And Alberto explained to me the things that she likes the most. So I got her everything, including tamales. And she likes only a certain kind of tamales. So we had to get those plus these various fruits. And so I had the honor of reconnecting with her. And here's the wonderful dog that lives up there too. Incredibly affectionate creature. Here's a Chicago connection that's going to surprise you. Living in that eco community is this woman in the middle. Her name is Beatrice, American woman. Now, to the left, you see my friend Alberto and Guy. To the right, the driver. He looks a little pop-eyed there, but he's actually quite a normal guy. Anyway, here's the incredible coincidence about B. I'm sure many of you know who Dick Simpson is. You know, he was the alderman of the 43rd Ward, independent guy, head of the political science department at the University of Illinois, Chicago until recently. Published a lot of stuff, books on the Chicago City Council, and he's often seen on the Chicago media consulting about city council issues. Anyway, Alberto said, let's go meet B. She has this nice house here. And so we went up there. And she said, you're from Chicago? Well, I'm from Chicago. It turned out that for many years, she lived about 2 blocks from me. And she was married to Dick Simpson for 3 years. And I said, well, I know him very well. I've been a friend of his for years. And she said, well, do say hello to him. So she's had various husbands and is now on her own. But she was married to him for 3 years and they lived in my neighborhood. So we had a lot to share. And you can imagine she's been there for years. So for somebody to stumble in there who had lived 2 blocks from her and knew all about this neighborhood and knew her ex-husband, it was quite an amazing coincidence. And I then sent Dick an email that night saying I met your ex-wife, and he said I have only the best. She said I have only friendly memories of our marriage, and he said we changed each other's lives, and I'm glad you met her. So that was pretty much the last thing I expected to run into in this kind of offbeat eco community outside Cuernavaca, but there she was, and she's apparently doing very well for herself. Well, then we went up from that eco community to another household of what we would call campesinos or even peasant people. And the reason was that Alberto wanted to buy avocados there to take back to Mexico City to his family. And so we went to this household and he said, you've got to meet this cat. She's an extraordinary cat. I'm sorry, boy, his name is Merlin, like Merlin the magician. And so Merlin sat in my lap, and then the hostess, I think we'll see her. She's on the right there, and her daughter. This is their altar. This is their Day of the Dead altar in their house. The hostess brought out these ears of corn, that elotes they call them, but these were not with mayonnaise or anything, just cooked from her milpa. Now the milpa is the plot, traditional plot that they have away from their house, where they have this traditional system of agriculture that's now very much in vogue and in hopes of saving the planet. where it requires minimal tending, and you get corn and squash and other things grow there, including they have avocados. But so she brought out the fresh corn from the milpa, which was a great treat, and handed each of us an ear. Now the cat was in my lap. No sooner had I started to eat this ear of corn than the cat just took it over, wrapped his paws around it, and just ate it exactly as a human being would eat, just ate all the kernels around the cob until they were all gone. Which I have lived with my whole life with cats. I never saw one that did that. So that was a great experience. And as to the avocados, I got a couple myself, and they were exceptionally good. But it brought up a question relating to the narco traffic in Mexico. The narco cartels have taken over not only the, of course, drug trade in Mexico, but they have now taken over the avocado trade, the big scale, not the kind they're doing. But in Michoacan, where the big avocado plantations are and so on, the narco cartels, especially the new generation Jalisco cartel, as they call it, have simply decided that's a lucrative business and they're going to run it, and they've pretty much gained control of it. It's just an example of how in many areas of Mexico, the cartels are basically running the country. There are no-go zones where even though AMLO, the president, has merged the military and the police, basically, so that the military patrol the streets of Mexico now, along with the police. And they have not been able to gain a handle on this. Yesterday, the Mexican Supreme Court verified the legitimacy of using the military on the streets for another year or two. So you will see soldiers marching around in Mexican cities doing police work now. But nobody has been able to put a stop to the violence there. Well, I think I'm just going to go back to the general screen here, if that's all right with you. And see if we can view everybody, if I can. Okay, so now I'm back to the general screen, and I can entertain any comments or questions that you have.
I have a question. Nancy.
Hi, Nancy. How are you?
So you talked about the colors for the Santa Muerte. What was the purple color for?
I wish I could tell you for sure. I think purple, yeah. The purple is interesting. I think the purple is kind of a multi-purpose color. And those colors, they represent a kind of syncretic accretion, because the color range has been influenced by the New Age movement. Santa Muerte has taken on many of the practices of the Afro-Cuban Santeria, but also New Age. And apparently some of the color candles, there's a particular candle of 7 colors, which apparently is related to New Age color range. And that's become a very popular candle. They keep changing. Nancy, there's no universal agreement on the meaning of the colors, because there's no central organization of the Santa Muerte religious movement. But there's a general understanding that the red is basically for women to control their men and keep them from getting out of line with other women. That's how it got popular. The gold, which is becoming more popular as a color, not surprisingly, is associated with getting money. And the black is associated with harming your enemies. But some of the other colors, like silver, white, is associated with purity. Sometimes you'll see Santa Muerte dressed in a white dress. That's her purity avatar, if you want to call it that. But other times she's in a black dress, and that's with her scythe. That means she's taking vengeance. Or you see her maybe in black, carrying the scales of justice. Now, that isn't exactly what we understand by the scales of justice. The people who are connecting to that as her worshipers or followers are often, what they mean by justice is getting their son out of jail, or helping their narco trafficker husband or son, or maybe themselves, not get arrested by the police, or not fall into the hands of the DEA, and above all, not to be extradited. That's the great fear. That's what happened to El Chapo, the head of the Sinaloa cartel. He's now languishing in a U.S. maximum security prison. That's the maximum nightmare of the narco traffickers in Mexico. Most of them escaped that, but many of them have shrines to Santa Muerte and Valverde in their houses and cemeteries and elsewhere in their gang headquarters. And that's one of the things they use her for. But in that case, she'd be wearing black and the candles would be black. But as to the purple, I can't say definitively.
Walter has a question.
Sorry, but so did Gloria had one first. Go ahead, Gloria.
The president seems to retain his popularity, even though he doesn't seem to have accomplished all that much, including finding out what happened to the 40 missing students.
Yeah, the 43.
How do you explain that?
Well, it's a complex issue. I don't have a complete explanation. Mike and I were talking about this a little bit last night. There was a big demonstration, the first really since AMLO or Lopez Obrador was elected president. 3 or 4 days ago, a march in Mexico City opposing especially the electoral reforms that he has put forward, which some people interpret as a bid for re-election. That's forbidden, absolutely forbidden by the Mexican Constitution. They have a single term limit of 6 years. But he then staged a counter march, I think it was yesterday, a very big one in Mexico City, and it had more than the opposition did. He has a huge following, I would say, mainly among the poor rural people, poor city people. They view him as a kind of on their side. Substantively, he has provided some benefits for people, things that we would call like social payments and so on that have helped make him popular. Bolsonaro tried this in Brazil, especially toward the election, trying to throw some money around. Didn't work out too well for him because apparently he was defeated. Well, Lula's now the president. But AMLO's support seems to come from people who viewed him as an alternative to the corrupt presidents they were so sick of. He knocked out all the traditional parties in Mexico, the PRI, which ruled Mexico for decades. He knocked out the PAN, the Christian Catholic party that took power for a while. He himself was part of the PRD, the Reformist Party. He was mayor of Mexico City, and a pretty successful one, as a PRD party. But then he left that and created this movement called Morena. And the Morena movement is a kind of personal vehicle of his, which has a mass following. Now, whether it's going to last, the promises he's made about getting a handle on violence have not played out. He is, I don't know that he's to blame exactly. His solution, originally, he said when he was first elected, I'm going to deal with the narco cartels by extending a warm embrace to them and showing them we're all love and affection. Well, that didn't work too well. And so then he went to the other extreme and said, I'm going to put the military right back out at the front of the anti-cartel, anti-crime, anti-violence efforts. And so, some people have said, this is very dangerous. This is extending too much power to the military, and they're just replacing the police or merging with them, which is happening. And as I said, the Supreme Court approved that, at least temporarily, as recently as yesterday, the Mexican Supreme Court. So I think his efforts like the Maya train, maybe it'll pay off. Maybe people will see benefits from it. Maybe the new airport, which is very much despised by drivers. It's a much greater distance from the center of Mexico City than the one we've always used there in the center of the city. And if some of those mega projects play out, maybe he'll get back into popularity, but I don't think he can bring off re-election. I don't think he could get the Constitution changed to do that. He has designated apparently a successor. And do you know who it is?
No.
Claudia Sheinbaum. She is the mayor of Mexico City.
Yeah.
And she's kind of a technocrat engineer. In some ways, I compare a little bit to Lightfoot in the sense that she's not a very successful, politician, really, in terms of mobilizing groups the way AMLO is. AMLO's a brilliant politician, the current president. But she seems to be, if there is a designated successor that he would kind of like to control from beyond the scenes, I think she's the one that's currently in the limelight. And it's interesting that she would be the first, female president of Mexico. we haven't had one yet. And she's certainly a highly qualified and highly educated person.
Does Trump have any influence in Mexico?
Trump is possibly the most hated person in Mexico. There are people who are hated there, but I think he would be at the top of the list. And somewhat attenuated since he's out of office. But when he first came onto the scene, 2016, on a big way, you know, he launched his presidential aspirations by horrible insults toward Mexicans, calling them rapists and robbers and so on, and invading our precious land and all this. And don't think people in Mexico didn't hear that message. You know, he has insulted our nation. I went there soon after that, and there was a whole exhibit at the Cartoon Museum of hundreds of anti-Trump cartoons, some of them very brilliant and very biting. Then a year later, I was back there during Day of the Dead, just walking along the Madero, the big walking street through the center to the Zocalo, the center of Mexico City, and the cathedral, on the night when people wear masks. And I have a Trump mask that I put on just to test the reaction. And a few people said, oh my God, that's Trump, they wanted a picture. But some people turned a little bit ugly. And I decided I would remove the mask because the hatred of him was so extreme that I thought somebody might attack me for wearing that mask. And pretty much they're open to any kind of mask during those days, but the Trump mask was maybe pushing it a little too far. So Trump, I don't say that there's a right wing in Mexico, believe me, and even a fascist group there. There are people who admire Trump in Mexico, but the general population, they find him disgusting. Hard to imagine, isn't it?
Can't imagine.
There's a lot of other things I could have touched on. I just, you know, we have limited time, but I wanted you to get some sense of what's going on in Mexico. And
Bob, is the Santa Muerte cult equally rural and urban? Or is it-
I think it's probably has many more followers in the urban areas, but it has reached the rural areas also. And there are some regional differences. For example, if you go to the Veracruz and that side of Mexico, the Caribbean side, there's more influence from the Afro-Cuban Santeria, as you would expect.
Yeah.
And that, by the way, extends into Mexico City. The Afro-Cuban influence in Mexico City is visible. The big cities have the biggest temples. There are some rural ones. I haven't visited all of them. Some of them are a bit out of the way. There's one in Querétaro that I haven't seen that is rural. But I think there are small shrines. Much of the Santa Muerte is just household shrines. Mm-hmm. So wouldn't necessarily have temples. But all the cities I visited, whether Merida, anywhere, they all have Santa Muerte temples. And Mexico City, numerous ones, 2 new ones of which I found on, as you saw in this recent trip. But I would say predominantly urban. Mm-hmm. But then the Mexican population itself is now predominantly urban. Yeah. So that's not too surprising. But let me mention one little thing I discovered about this, how some of this is interconnected. You know, we talked last time, Mike said it was a big deal that I went into that Tepito neighborhood, which is a kind of scary place. And there is a cartel called the Tepito Union. It operates in Mexico City, and they have an alliance with the Sinaloa cartel, itself weakened now, but still a powerful force in Mexico. And they have been running operations on the Mexican tourist coast there in Cancun and Tulum and that area. So they send people out from Tepito in conjunction with the Sinaloa cartel, then they run them back into Mexico City. And these people have Santa Muerte shrines in their gang headquarters. One of them was raided last time I was there in Tepito in Mexico City. And they found a Santa Muerte shrine with a lot of Afro-Cuban influence in it. And ominously, Gloria, you mentioned the 43 missing students from Ayotzinapa, in case it's never been solved. they had 43 skulls aligned around that altar.
Ooh,
Ooh,
ooh.
And that had a certain resonance in Mexico City. The police arrested about 17 of the narco chiefs from the Tepito Union. The next day, a judge released all of them. So that's not an uncommon event in Mexico. Can you imagine corrupt judges? We know nothing of that in America, but it's pretty brazen in Mexico. And by the way, I think it's indisputable that one of the reasons that AMLO or anybody would have such a challenge in dealing with narco violence and the extension of organized crime in Mexico is the penetration of the institutions of the state by the cartel powers. Not just the police, but the prison guards, the police, the military itself, the drug enforcement agencies and so on, the judiciary, and even the Congress. They're just intertwined so that it's almost impossible to separate them. And that's why, quote, reform is an immense challenge.
I have a question. How does the Catholic Church deal with this cult?
The Catholic Church has denounced the Santa Muerte cult for a long time. They try to combat it by promoting the St. Jude cult, because St. Jude, they think they can kind of manage that crowd. Now, a lot of the people that go to the St. Jude gatherings on the 28th of every month in Mexico City are small-scale criminals. And a lot of them are also drug addicts, alcoholics, and so on. But the church has taken the position that we welcome them as long as they're connecting to St. Jude, but not Santa Muerte. So they've tried to pit the one against the other. Meanwhile, many of the followers of Santa Muerte don't care. They'll worship St. Jude and Santa Muerte and Jesus and the Virgin of Guadalupe. It's kind of a loose mix for them. But the church was behind the imprisonment of the figure I mentioned to you earlier in 2011. The Pope actually came to Mexico and denounced the Santa Muerte cult as satanic. And so the church has strongly denounced Santa Muerte worship, but it's out of their control now. There are just too many millions of followers. And many of them, as in the Mass you saw, there will be a crucifix up there. They'll say, after this, you can go to the Mass at the regular church down the street. We're all in the same boat. But there are some followers of Santa Muerte who are exclusivists, and they will not allow any tribute to the Virgin of Guadalupe, Jesus, or anything else. But most of them, I think, are more eclectic. But the church, in direct response to your question, the church has denounced this movement as satanic.
Any other questions?
Nice to see quite a few of you, by the way.
When are you going to run a tour for us in Mexico?
Yeah. Well, I have this aversion to group experiences, Peter.
Special group. Special people.
I will mention to you, by the way, if any of you might be planning a trip to Mexico City, I will be very happy to put you in touch with both that driver and that guide. They are both terrific people.
We are planning.
And they're people that you could call on and be confident in, which is a very important thing to know if you're connecting with somebody in Mexico City. When I reconnected with Alberto, I first knew him in Merida. He became a driver for take me to see some of the Maya ruins there. And I reconnected with him a few years later in Mexico City, and I said I would meet you at my hotel. I was actually trembling because I wanted to go to Tepito and see that birthday celebration of Santa Muerte, and I was going to do it with him, but I hadn't seen him for 3 or 4 years. His appearance had changed considerably, and I thought he might be a substitute, that he had gotten somehow my email and was presenting himself not the person I had known before. But then I realized his appearance had just changed. It was the same person. And so subsequently we become friends, and I have complete confidence in him. He's a little bit local, who isn't, and he has some hallucinations sometimes, and but he took me to meet his family.
Fit right in with you, Bob.
Yeah, we kind of hit it off, and birds of a feather. loonies like each other. And he took me to meet his mother's, he calls her a witch. She's a traditional healer. And so I have a lot of confidence. I've met his family. I've been out to his neighborhood, and he's a very good person for you to connect with. I never speak English with him, but I know that he speaks enough English, if you don't know Spanish, to be useful to you. Then if you need a driver, I strongly recommend doing that. Mike and I talked about this. For about $100 or a little more, you can get this guy for a day, and he will take you wherever you want to go safely and kind of back you up. And if you want to hang around somewhere for 2 hours, I always invite them to have lunch with me and so on too. So we exchange a lot of stuff about living in Mexico and challenges there, and they become friends as well as, people that you've hired. And I also pay every day.
Go on.
I was going to say, I pay the deal I have with Alberto, I established in Merida. I've done this in travels elsewhere. I say, I will pay for all your transport and meals during the time we're together, and then $50 a day in cash, which I had to escalate a little bit because of inflation. And then the driver I paid was about $120, but I had him for 16 hours. It was a very long day, and he drove to to Cuernavaca and many other destinations. So I had double backup in that rough neighborhood with the first of those masses. I had both the driver, who's a big guy, and Alberto, and it turned out to be no problem.
Yeah, I would say if you're visiting Mexico City, you have to have a driver. Yeah, you can take Uber, but the Uber guy's not going to wait for you.
That's right.
Wherever you are.
Then you get another Uber. I've done that. I've done that a lot, actually.
But I think the driver is just a better idea altogether.
No, it is if you want a whole day, but sometimes it gets expensive. If just your ordinary stops, you want to hit a museum or something in Mexico City, I use Uber all the time. Uber has become a little problematic because of these political demonstrations in the streets that get blocked off so much. Right. Also, Uber has a big competitor now in Mexico City, a Chinese company, which is, I forget what they're called, TT or something. And they have run competition with Uber. And the Uber service didn't seem quite as good to me this time as it had been. But believe me, compared to hailing a cab in the street, which you must never do, it's so much safer. When the driver arrives, you ask him his name. It's almost always a man. And you don't get in the car unless that name corresponds to the one in your message. And then he will usually ask you your name. They always know I'm a gringo. I mentioned this to Mike because I show up on the Uber connection with the driver as Bob. Well, that's not a Mexican name. And then you can leave a little message for the driver to spot you, because often you're in a crowded street and that car's pulling up amidst traffic. They give you, of course, the type of car. I never know what one car is or another, but the color and the license number and all that. But then to help the driver find you, I always put in the message, güero con sombrero. Now, güero in Mexican Spanish is a blonde or a gringo and a white guy. And sombrero, of course, is a rimmed hat. And I have a Tilly hat. So I stand there, white guy with a Tilly hat. I'm a güero con sombrero. So the driver has that message when he's looking for me. I could put viejo gringo, but I don't do it.
Cab drivers are often off-duty policemen with pistols. So they're, moonlighting to rob you.
That is exactly what happened to me in 1999. That's why I don't take those cabs anymore.
Off-duty policemen?
Yes.
Well, what they were doing, and this has somewhat been curtailed because they got rid of those Volkswagen taxis, but they would just they would at gunpoint steal the taxi from the driver. Then they would switch into civilian garb and go around robbing customers. That's why reporting that crime to the police was such a exercise in futility.
Wonderful.
Police are so corrupt.
Believe me, nobody in Mexico has any respect or confidence in the police. I meant to show you, by the way, I'm sorry I didn't, an image of what do you call it, like a tote bag. And it has a picture of a woman giving the finger. And it says, oh, I wish I had it in front of me. It says, always for the whore, never for the cop. And this is a feminist statement. I'm always on the side of the whore. It says puta. I'm always on the side of the whore, never the cop. And this reflects a general distrust of police in Mexico, which is very well founded. They are so riddled with corruption. I've had many experiences of being forced to pay bribes to them.
Well, thank you very much.
Hey, it was great to see all of you.
Great, yeah.
And Mike, I know this was recorded, and at some point, if you wanted to review any of it or share it, it should be on YouTube. But the previous one is already on YouTube. You just put Bob Clarke, Santa Muerte, and you can see that previous.
I've made us a YouTube channel, so pretty soon now that I've cracked the code on how to get these recordings out.
The way you put them out, my friend Sarda puts them on YouTube, so that's how they're up there. And then if you can do it directly, all the better.
Right, but we're going to have our own YouTube channel as
and
well.
do recall, if you are planning a trip to Mexico City, I will put you in touch with those two people if you want that. I think it's a very good help in that travel.
Oh, absolutely. All right, thanks everybody for coming. And Bob, that was another, fantastic.
Well, I wish the little mechanics of it had been a little less challenging, but that's.
I have some ideas for December, so I'm working on that. I have to cajole people into appearing, but I'm often successful. So I have to pull a rabbit out of a hat every month.
Yeah, I know, and you're doing such an incredible job on top of all the other great stuff. By the way, tomorrow I do expect to join that lecture on
David Stewart.
Mike and I, just as a final footnote here, we both tuned in to a really wonderful archaeological Zoom a couple of days ago on the topic of Maya enemas. And it turns out that the enema phenomenon was unbelievably widespread in the Maya world, and all the apparatus that was shown. And the most intriguing part was that the high-ranking old men would have their enemas administered from the rear by attractive young women. And these are depicted in countless images that the archaeologists have found. I mean, it's an entire topic in Maya archaeology. Mike,
they're not regular enemas, understand. They have psychotropic drugs as liquid in the enemas. They have even tobacco, but what they did is they selected out tobacco for really high nicotine content. So their tobacco was like a psychotropic psychedelic drug. It wasn't just tobacco. And they liquefied that and used that as an enema, among other things. So it's a real interesting enema phenomena. And the murals that this guy showed all over the Maya world of folks giving enemas and taking enemas. I've seen a lot of those murals before, but I didn't realize the context. And so I didn't see what was going on as I was looking at the murals. But now that he's shown us the details of what's in those murals, I realize now that these enema murals are everywhere in the Maya world, and the particulars of the enemas are right there in the murals. So if you know that that's the case, you can see it right away when you look at these murals. It's just an amazing artistic, anthropological, drug-induced phenomena.
Yes, it's part of the wonderful Zoom world out there. And that whole lecture, which was done by an eminent archaeologist, was backed up by other archaeologists who were in real time offering epigraphical readings and so on, and contributing their own knowledge to the consolidation of our understanding of the Maya enema phenomenon.
Bob, early in the trying to set things up, you said something about Christmas being in December was
December 25th,
arbitrary. It's not. It was deliberately put there to counter the pagan holiday.
The Saturnalia, I know that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't random. It was a deliberate move.
And I think the same thing with Santa Muerte, because it can't be a coincidence that they picked for her birthday the onset of Days of the Dead. So, I mean, obviously, there's an arbitrary, well, when I say arbitrary, it's not God-given, put it that way.
Yeah.
the Bible doesn't say that Jesus was born on December 25th.
No, but it does say he was born in the spring because of the shepherds and the lambs in the fields and all that. And it's pretty well accepted it was a spring birth.
Yeah, well, he was a spring lamb, all right, Agnus Dei. But I like the idea that the church was smart enough to know that if you were going
Oh, yeah.
to beat down the Roman challenge in Saturnalia, you better link the two.
So, all right, it was really nice seeing you all. Thanks again, Bob.
Okay, over and
Yeah,
out. Great.
thanks.
See
And
you
we'll
again
see,
soon, I hope.
we'll have another event at the end of December that I'm working on now. So we'll see you then.
Okay, and thanks for
Bye.
your work, Mike.
Let's take them.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.